I came home from a 2-day trip and found myself locked out of my own property. Not in some legal sense. Not because of a paperwork dispute. I mean physically locked out. There was a brand new steel gate across the entrance to my ranch, wrapped in a thick chain, the kind they use on construction sites, and hanging right in the middle was a sign that read private community access only. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had taken a wrong turn. I just stood there with my truck idling behind me, staring at that gate while the Texas heat rolled off the dirt road in waves. 27 acres. Every acre paid for. Every fence post hammered in with my own hands. Yet somehow, according to that sign, I wasn't welcome anymore. My name is Cole Mercer. I'm 48 years old, retired from the Fort Worth Fire Department after nearly 25 years on the job. 3 years ago, after my shoulder finally gave out, I sold my house in the city and bought a small ranch outside of town called Redstone Creek. Nothing fancy, just a modest house, a horse barn, a few pecan trees, and enough space that the loudest thing I heard most mornings was my dog Ranger snoring on the porch. That quiet was the reason I moved there. After years of alarms, smoke, sirens, and chaos, I wanted peace. For a while, I got it. Then Silver Oak Preserve showed up. At first, it was just survey crews, then bulldozers, then trucks. Within a year, hundreds of acres bordering my eastern property line had been transformed into one of those master plan communities with stone monuments, decorative ponds, identical mailboxes, and an HOA that seemed to believe it governed the entire universe. The first letter arrived 6 months after construction started. According to them, my barn was visually inconsistent with community standards. I laughed and threw it away. The second letter claimed my tractor was visible from several newly constructed homes. That one went into the trash too. The third letter suggested my livestock fencing negatively affected property values. I framed that one and hung it in my workshop. I thought it was funny. Apparently, they didn't. A few weeks later, their HOA president came to visit. His name was Gavin Sterling. You know the type. Perfect haircut, perfect polo shirt, perfect smile. The kind of guy who looked like he'd never had dirt under his fingernails a single day in his life. He stopped at my gate and gave me a smile that somehow felt more insulting than an actual insult. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "we'd love to discuss ways we can improve the visual harmony between your property and our community." I remember looking over his shoulder at rows of nearly identical beige houses. Then I looked back at my horses. "Visual harmony?" I asked. "Property values," he corrected. I nodded slowly. "You built a subdivision next to a ranch." "Correct. And now you're upset there's a ranch next to your subdivision?" His smile twitched. Just a little. The first crack in a mask. What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a warning disguised as politeness. Every sentence started with words like cooperation and community. Every sentence ended sounding suspiciously like control. When he finally left, he gave me one last smile. The same polished smile. The same empty eyes. And as I watched his SUV disappear down the road, something in my gut told me that wasn't the end of it. It was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but while I was busy enjoying my peaceful little ranch, Gavin and the Silver Oak Board were already putting together a plan. And a few months later, that plan would leave me standing in front of a locked gate, staring at my own land from the wrong side of the fence. The strange thing is, when you've spent years fighting fires, you learn to recognize danger long before anyone else sees smoke. Sometimes it's a smell. Sometimes it's a sound. Sometimes it's just a feeling sitting in the back of your neck that refuses to go away. A week after Gavin's visit, I started noticing survey flags along the eastern edge of my property. Little orange markers sticking up from the grass. At first I figured it was routine construction work, but then I noticed they weren't staying on Silver Oak land. They were getting closer. Every few days, another one appeared. Then another. Then another. So one morning, I grabbed my original survey maps and walked the property line myself. Everything checked out. My fences were exactly where they'd always been. Still, something didn't feel right. A few days later, I stopped by the county records office. Small town places never really change. Same worn floors. Same coffee pot. Same people behind the counter. An older clerk named Walter had known me for years. After pulling up several recent filings, he leaned back in his chair and frowned. "Well, that's interesting. I didn't like the sound of that." "What is?" He turned the monitor toward me. Silver Oak had purchased a narrow strip of land from a neighboring parcel. A tiny piece, long and thin, almost useless by itself, except for one thing. It ran right alongside the dirt road leading to my property. I stared at the screen. Can they block me? Walter shrugged. Not directly. Then he paused. But there are creative ways to make life difficult. I drove home, feeling uneasy. 2 weeks later, my mother had a minor procedure in Dallas, so I spent a couple of days helping her recover. Nothing serious. Mostly making meals, carrying groceries, and listening to stories I'd already heard 100 times. Honestly, it was nice. For 2 days, I forgot all about Silver Oak. Then I came home and found a gate. The fence stretched farther than I could see. Tall steel panels, fresh concrete footings, professional installation, expensive, deliberate. It followed the property boundary, curved around sections of land Silver Oak had recently acquired, and eventually connected to the county road. The gate sat directly across the only practical entrance to my ranch. Technically, they hadn't touched my property. Not 1 inch. That was the genius of it. They had simply surrounded the access point using land they legally owned. The result was the same. I couldn't get home. I remember standing there staring at it while Ranger barked from somewhere beyond the fence. That sound hit harder than I expected, because suddenly it wasn't about property anymore. It was about someone deciding they could control my life. Most people would have called a lawyer first. Some people would have started screaming. A few might have driven right through the gate. Instead, I got back into my truck and started thinking. That night, I called a friend named Ethan Brooks. Smartest real estate guy I'd ever met. The kind of person who read property records for fun. After listening to the whole story, he let out a long whistle. That's bold. That's one word for it. Then he got quiet. Finally, he said, "Let me dig around." 3 days later, he called back. I could hear excitement in his voice. "Cole, you're gonna love this. Please tell me somebody screwed up." Oh, somebody definitely screwed up. Turns out the original landowner hadn't sold everything. There was another parcel. Tiny, forgotten, almost worthless, except it connected directly to the county road behind Silver Oak's new gate. I didn't even let him finish. "Can I buy it?" I already called. By the end of the week, the property was mine, and suddenly the entire situation looked very different. Because that little forgotten parcel contained something Silver Oak desperately needed. A maintenance access area, a utility storage building, and inside that building was something even more valuable. The master key for their entrance gate. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call Gavin. I didn't send letters. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I just waited. Patience can be a powerful weapon, especially against people who mistake arrogance for intelligence. A month later, Silver Oak held its annual community festival. Food trucks, live music, bounce houses. The whole thing looked like a commercial for suburban perfection. That Saturday morning, I drove my old pickup onto my newly acquired strip of land and parked where everyone could see me. Then I unloaded a wooden sign. Several residents watched curiously. I hammered it into the ground while kids ran around nearby, holding snow cones. Private property, N.O. trespassing owner. Cole Mercer. It took less than 30 seconds. Gavin appeared almost immediately. He walked toward me with that same polished smile. Except this time it wasn't polished. It was furious. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I stepped back and admired the sign. "Marking my property. This road belongs to Silver Oak. Part of it doesn't." I handed him a copy of the deed. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he just stared, then stared again, as if reading it twice might somehow change reality. "That's impossible." I smiled. "Funny thing. That's exactly what I thought when I found your gate blocking my ranch." His jaw tightened. The crowd was starting to notice. People were watching now, whispering, pointing, and that's when I walked over to the utility building, unlocked the door, reached inside, and pulled out the master key. The silence around us was beautiful. Gavin looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. I held the brass key up between 2 fingers. "Looking for this?" Nobody said a word. Then I walked to the gate, unlocked it, pulled it open, and drove through. For the first time in nearly a week, I was finally back on my own property. As I rolled down the dirt road toward my house, I looked in the mirror. Gavin was still standing there, motionless, humiliated. And if the story had ended there, honestly, it would have made a pretty good story. But that wasn't even the real fight. Because what happened next would turn a petty HOA dispute into something much darker. Something that eventually landed people in court and nearly got my barn burned to the ground. The following Monday, 3 SUVs rolled onto my driveway. Not construction trucks. Not maintenance crews. Lawyers. You can always tell. They moved differently, dressed differently, smiled differently. Gavin stepped out first. Behind him were two board members I'd never met and a woman carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. She introduced herself as Victoria Kane, legal counsel for Silver Oak Preserve. The way she spoke was calm, professional, polished, which somehow made what she said even crazier. Mr. Mercer, the board has submitted a proposal requesting your property be reclassified as protected community green space. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because I honestly thought she was joking. You want to turn my ranch into a park? Not a park, she said. A managed natural buffer zone. I looked at Gavin, then back at her, then back at Gavin. You fenced me out of my own property, and now you're trying to absorb it into your development. Nobody answered directly. That told me everything I needed to know. Fortunately, I had already made a phone call. My cousin Ryan happened to be one of the best land use attorneys in the state. The moment he heard what was happening, he got involved. And unlike me, Ryan enjoyed legal fights. A little too much, honestly. I put him on speaker. After listening for about 30 seconds, he said, "You have exactly 10 seconds to leave my client's property before I start filing trespassing complaints and emergency injunctions." Victoria's confidence slipped for the first time. The meeting ended quickly, but the war didn't. A few nights later, I heard machinery running near the northern boundary. I launched my drone and sent it toward the noise. The camera picked up crews digging, survey stakes, construction equipment, blueprints spread across folding tables. Silver Oak was building a secondary access road, a way around the land they no longer controlled. Then something happened I still have trouble believing. A spotlight hit the drone. A second later, I heard a crack. The video spun violently, then went black. Someone had shot it out of the sky. That was the moment everything changed, because now we weren't arguing over property values anymore. People were getting reckless. The next morning, I forwarded the footage to Ryan and the county sheriff. After that, things escalated fast. Silver Oak suddenly filed thousands of dollars in supposed community violations against me. Unauthorized structures, agricultural nuisance claims, visual impact assessments. One accusation actually claimed my barn roof created excessive sunlight reflection. I wish I were making that up. Then came the foreclosure notice. A foreclosure notice on property I owned outright. Ryan nearly laughed himself out of his chair reading it. Then he stopped laughing and started filing motions. The judge froze everything pending investigation. That same week, someone cut the power line feeding my property. Clean cut. Professional job. Not vandalism. A message. That night, I sat on my porch with Ranger beside me, listening to my generator hum in the darkness. And that's when a question kept bothering me. Why? Why were they risking lawsuits, criminal charges, and public embarrassment over one ranch? The answer came from an 82-year-old rancher named Vernon Tate. Years earlier, he'd sold most of the land that eventually became Silver Oak. When I visited him, he listened quietly while I explained everything. Then he smiled. The kind of smile old ranchers get when they know something you don't. Developers always rush, he said. What does that mean? It means they miss things. Turns out Vernon had kept ownership of a tiny strip of land. A ridiculous little sliver. Barely useful, except for one detail. It ran directly beneath part of Silver Oak's administration building and parking lot. I bought it immediately. A week later, I posted an official notice on the front door. Notice of trespass commercial operations occurring on private property. The reaction was immediate. Local news stations showed up. Residents started asking questions. And for the first time, Silver Oak looked vulnerable. Then came court. The courtroom was packed. Residents, reporters, county officials. Everyone wanted to see how it would end. Ryan presented everything. The gate, the access restrictions, the false violations, the drone footage, the foreclosure attempt, the power line. Then came the final blow. Internal board emails. Hundreds of them. Messages discussing ways to pressure me into selling. Plans to increase financial stress. Strategies for creating what they called ownership fatigue. The room went completely silent. I looked across the courtroom. For the first time since I'd met him, Gavin wasn't smiling. He looked scared. By the end of the hearing, every claim against me was dismissed. Every lien was voided. Every restriction failed. But the judge wasn't finished. Several matters were referred for criminal investigation. Fraud, conspiracy, property interference, potential arson-related inquiries connected to other incidents investigators had uncovered. The room exploded into whispers. A few hours later, county deputies arrived at Silver Oak's office. And right there in front of residents and reporters, Gavin and 2 board members were escorted out in handcuffs. I won't lie, part of me felt satisfied, but mostly I felt tired, because winning doesn't always feel the way people imagine. Sometimes it just feels quiet. A few months later, people kept asking whether I planned to sell my land back to Silver Oak. The answer was no. Instead, I built something, a simple community pavilion. Nothing fancy, live music on weekends, barbecue cookouts, fundraisers for veterans, youth rodeo events, the kind of place where people actually talk to each other instead of arguing through HOA newsletters. Funny enough, some Silver Oak residents started showing up. At first, they acted nervous, then comfortable, then regular. Turns out most people weren't the problem. A handful of leaders were. The new HOA board eventually sent me a formal apology. I appreciated it, and life slowly returned to normal. Mostly, these days, when I sit on my porch watching the sunset with Ranger stretched across the deck, I still think about how close I came to losing everything. Not because someone stole my land, but because a few people became convinced they had the right to control it. And that's the part that still sticks with me. So let me ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have fought as hard as I did? Would you have exposed them publicly? Would you have pushed back every step of the way? Or would you have taken the money, sold the land, and walked away? Because honestly, I still don't know if I chose the high road or just a different battlefield. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, difficult neighbors, or anyone who thought they had the right to decide how you should live your life, share your story too. Because sometimes protecting your home isn't really about property at all. Sometimes it's about refusing to let someone else decide where your boundaries belong.